You're listening to Around Comics. 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 Comics.
You are listening to Around Comics episode 451. Welcome back. It's Thursday, which means we're live on YouTube and Facebook and all those places. And we have a very special episode in store for you folks. We're doing something new. We're trying something new here on Around Comics after all these years. We have a new segment. This is the brainchild of Mr. Christopher Niesman. And
Format change,
as we've been known to do in the past. This is going to be Around Comics Under the Influence. What is Under the Influence? Well, basically, we have special guests on, and they are going to talk about one single issue of a comic book that has influenced them in some way in their work or their life or whatever it may be. And this week, we are joined by a very special guest, a friend of the program, an alumni, an Around Comics alumni, Mr. Will Pfeifer. How are you, Will?
I'm good. I'm honored. I'm honored to be here.
First.
You are in the larger Around Comics family as one of our co-hosts for Film Force 5.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Here, this is
the AC fam.
That's right, the AC fam,
as we call it, the fam. So the book that you have chosen as the one single issue, because we kind of put a hard limit on it. It had to be one single issue. You picked Daredevil issue 181. It is a special double size issue.
It's double size.
You did cut
this is a rule that will have no double size.
You can read half of it.
I appreciate Will kicking this off by going with Citizen Kane, just so we can get it out of the way. Right?
But
yeah, you do Centaurs #1, Chris. We won't be as
when Will's on Film Force 5, like getting him to pick a mainstream movie, like it's always something from the 1920s. It's some foreign film, something, a British film or something. And it's like, for comics, Daredevil 181. I'm just going to pick one of the most like classic and renowned comic books of all time. But
this comic is over 40 years old now.
Yeah.
This is ancient.
That's kind of scary.
And this is the issue. I bought this at my local corner store before I even started going to comic book stores. This was just off the rack at the corner store. It was $1 cover price for a double issue back then.
Oh my God.
Crazy.
That is kind of crazy. I've been a Daredevil fan pre Frank Miller. I was buying just before he started, doing Daredevil is when I started buying Daredevil. And I also bought it. I didn't go and dig mine out because I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in a box somewhere, but I did dig out the omnibus that has it on the cover.
Yeah, there it is.
My green screen's kind of screwing it up, but there you go, the Daredevil 181. So I don't know how we haven't done this before, so I guess we got to kind of figure out what this is going to be. But I guess let's start with
why?
Why this issue?
Why? Well, I had been buying. This is a couple years after I really got into comics, and I started buying Batman and DC Comics Presents and Brave and the Bold. And then I switched over to Marvel when I discovered the Byrne Claremont X-Men. So I was really into that. And somehow I stumbled onto almost the first issue of Miller's Daredevil. It was just like, I don't know what cover because I didn't hear about it anywhere back then. I didn't have any fanzines and there was no internet, obviously. So I just stumbled onto it and I loved it. And, I was really into, it was all ninjas and Elektra back then. And so when I saw this issue and you read on the cover, it says Bullseye versus Elektra. One wins, one dies. And even then, in the early days, I had seen that dodge a million times. So I never actually figured anyone would die in this issue. But spoiler alert, Elektra does in fact die in this issue. Now, she's been brought back multiple times, but as far as this one was concerned, for a while she was actually dead. And So that part, that sort of made it memorable.
That was at a time in comics where, I mean, deaths had more of a permanence to them. I mean, there weren't a lot of characters that had, come back. It's also like the era of Death of Captain Marvel, where it's like he was never going to come back. Right?
Phoenix, this had to be the era of Phoenix dying.
Yeah.
So it might have been just a little before this, maybe. I can't quite remember when, but yeah, it was that era. And those deaths they felt permanent, even if they weren't permanent, but they sure felt that way. And so that was one reason it was memorable. But plus, it's just like Sal, you just showed the splash page where how that and this has a comics code seal on it, by the way. This is a violent comic.
A lot of people die.
And this is the era you can see the blood is black. Like that's how they dodged the code, I guess. All the blood was black, but there is a lot of
shadows. It's in the shadows.
Yeah.
Well, I worked with Miller's art for sure, right?
It works perfectly. And the other thing is, this is just Miller and Jansen at just peak synergy. I mean, not only Klaus Jansen's inks on this, but probably more importantly, in a way, his colors are incredible in this issue. And, I'm looking at the old smelly newsprint issue, so I'm not sure if it works as well on glossy paper, but boy, it just looks great. It's like a limited color palette. And, there's actually some duotone shade he uses in various places here and there, or some zip tone. And it really, it's, so the art story, but also this is one Miller, this is obviously pre-Dark Knight, pre-Born Again, pre-Year One, all pre-Ronin even. And he was really, it's so unlike other Marvel or especially DC comics of the day. Really thin panels, either vertical or horizontal. He breaks up the page in really interesting ways. He packs a lot of panels on some pages. So it's very, it really controls that rhythm. It's really tight. But then he has a page where Bullseye is lying around drinking, and he stumbles onto what he thinks is Daredevil's secret identity. And it's just a giant, big panel of Bullseye with white space. The ha page, right? Yeah. And it's so graphically, it's beautifully done. And Miller nowadays, he's been around, it's like almost 50 years in the business, I guess. And, his stuff now is, it's whatever it is. And he's done some good stuff, and he's done some, his style has certainly loosened up over the years, but boy, he could really draw back then. And he really knew how to use word balloons sparingly. The page where Elektra actually gets killed, there's no dialogue at all. There's one piece of dialogue on the next page where she says Matt, but it reads so differently from your average comic of the time, and even it's continuing what he did in earlier issues, but it just even now, when I haven't read it in probably 10 years, and when I just reread it today, it holds up. Some parts don't hold up perfectly, but boy, it pulls you right through, and it just works as it works so well as a story with its peaks and its valleys, and it's all building to a big moment. And then after the big moment, we have sort of the denouement where, the follow-up, and it's good. It's good stuff. It's also dedicated to Wally Wood, by the way, I noticed. Because I think he must have died just before this was completed.
Yeah, I think he passed away right at that. I think they announced it in the letters page.
Yeah, it says we dedicate this issue to Wally Wood, who, of course, drew very early issues of Daredevil. With Stan, and I inked one of Miller's covers, I want to say, on Daredevil, like the one with Matt holding his dead dad in the boxing ring. I want to say Wally Wood inked that.
Oh, okay.
One of his last things.
There's the Frank Castle cameo.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
And that's well used. This is before he became the icon of police officers everywhere, but and this is this before or after? Maybe written after, but published before. But they had those 2 issues of Daredevil with PCP that originally they didn't publish because of the code, and then I think they published them. They slotted them in later, but it was Daredevil versus the Punisher or something. And it's Miller's first run on Daredevil was an interesting time in comics,
right? Yeah, there's the Daredevil Punisher. The 2-part story is issues 183 and 184.
Okay, so almost right after this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was like very controversial. I remember they had to.
Yeah.
think they had a whole because it
That's
showed
the-
drug use.
Well, it's got the great cover. It's the Daredevil kind of Dirty Harry cover. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it held. I haven't read it in a long time. It held up. The one part that did make me laugh is when Bullseye's like, "She's trained as a ninja," and it's supposed to be like a real like mic drop moment. Of like,
Yeah.
oh.
Well,
No way, bro. She trained as a ninja. Oh no,
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Ninja.
I don't know why that struck me as funny. Like just like very 80s. Like ninja.
It's very
Like
80s.
that's all you need to. That's all you need to say.
Hey man, that's it. That's all you need.
Well,
There's so
earlier
many
they
Anything more
talked-
ninjas in the
specific?
80s.
No, just
No,
ninja.
Just ninja, basic ninja.
Basic Ninja. What more do you need than Basic Ninja? Come on.
One panel that struck me in this, I'm looking at it's when Bullseye narrates the whole issue, and so he's narrating it as we see Matt Murdock at home getting news that he's escaped on the radio. And he's walking past the wall with tons of photographs and pictures on the wall. And I'm wondering, why does Matt Murdock have all those pictures on the wall?
For guests. It's for
I guess
guests,
it's for
Will. I
guests,
mean,
I guess-
you know.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
this
I don't
does-
think I don't think I've read this in a long time. Like I didn't read it when it came out at the time. It was only years later because I am not a big Daredevil fan. Like I'll read Daredevil sometimes, but it's certainly not something like I usually pick up. It has to be for whatever reason. I'm like, oh, I hear that this is good. I'll go get it. And even then I might like slide out of there. But yeah, I mean, just like in reading this after having not read it in a long time, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Like these are really this is really good, you know. And it's like the use of narration. It's like he like kind of switches what kind of book it is at times, where it's like, oh, this is a superhero book, and then it's suddenly like, oh, actually, this is just like a martial arts story, and then it's like a revenge story, and it's like sometimes it's all thought, it's all you know caption, and sometimes it's all dialogue, and sometimes there's neither, and like just like switching it up throughout the book, so it's kind of like I don't really know what's going to happen next, you know, and it's like it's surprising.
It is, and I couldn't remember. I mean, I remember the you know the big events of the story, but some of the stuff in it surprised me. I'd completely forgotten that Bullseye sort of stumbles onto Daredevil's secret identity. He later is tricked into thinking he was wrong, but then he presents it to Kingpin, and Kingpin is like, "Oh, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." But of course, later Miller would come back to Daredevil and use that for just a, you know, I think Born Again is one of the great, you know, Marvel superhero stories, and you know, he really made the most of it. But
for sure,
here it's but the
yeah,
way
it's one of my
I think
favorites.
there's something really.
I was gonna say it was one of my favorite scenes where Bullseye throws the scalpel, and Matt it stops it with his cane, and that's the big tip off. I was like, what a great way for for this maniac. It's like, well, yeah, if it's not Daredevil, I'm gonna kill this very prominent New York City lawyer. If it is, then I'll know because I'm a psychopath.
I mean, I think there's something very Frank Miller about like Daredevil's identity gets figured out because, like, of course, someone would figure it out. You're a lawyer. You're not like a mechanic,
right?
Like,
Yeah, he's a high-profile lawyer who's in the papers all the time. Yeah,
it's like, of course. I mean, it's not even like Bullseye's some sort of mad genius. He's just like, oh, that guy kind of looks like Daredevil. Like he just kind of like pieces it together because of course like the fact that Matt Murdock's like mix of like doubt and sort of hubris of like, oh yes, like I can do all of these things, and then it's like, of course someone's gonna figure it out. Like you're not magic, you're not like Superman with like duplicate robots to help cover
exactly.
Right? Like it's like someone figured it out. You get up in front of people and you talk all the time.
Yeah,
you're all over the place.
Yeah. And looking at the cover, and I don't know if I've ever noticed before, Daredevil he has no eye holes in his costume. So
wait a minute. And his ears are covered up.
His ears are those are some form-fitting things on the costume. But it's I also like the whole. It starts the reason Bullseye is able to escape from prison is because he is interviewed on the Tom Snide show. and he escapes them. But it's, I don't think I realized at the time, but I've since learned, I think Tom Snyder had Manson on his show once, and this had to be what Miller's referencing.
Yeah.
So
it's a little bit of a precursor to how Miller uses his views on media in like DKR. We see a lot of those breadcrumbs that go back into Daredevil.
It was interesting. I was thinking about that scene, and then I was thinking about the Quentin Tarantino script for this Natural Born Killers, and the scene where how Woody Harrelson's character gets out of jail because he's being interviewed by Robert
Wayne
Downey
Gale.
Jr.
Yeah,
Wayne Gale, and then he uses that to break out. And it's like, gee, I wonder if because that was a decade later, or more. I wonder if that was sort of influenced by Miller.
I think it's safe to say that Quentin Tarantino has read Daredevil 181.
Oh, I'm sure.
Probably.
I think he has. And the scene where Bullseye does escape, and he does it by, it's established earlier that if he gets these horrible splitting headaches, and the guard will give him a pill and calm him down, and he fakes a headache, he gets the pill, and then he spits the pill into the guard's eye and distracts him. I thought it was like, okay, even if, how's he going to get out? Because he's got these giant shackles on and all that. It reminded me sort of how Alan Moore, the scenes with Rorschach in prison, and you're like, well, how's he going to get out? And it's like kind of smart and exciting to see how he does it. And I think it's pretty good to see, Bullseye sort of use his powers and use his smarts to get out. Now, he also hijacks a police helicopter that he flies into Manhattan. I still don't know how you land with nobody noticing you, and you think it'd be easy to keep track of a police helicopter, but
goes off like, oh, there he goes. Yeah, he's got that helicopter.
He's gone. If only we could do something about it.
If only we had another helicopter. We only have one.
He got it.
Well, it was the early 80s,
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, when I was a kid and I read this, I'm sure I didn't think of it.
No, of course he escapes in a helicopter. That's how villains escape prison islands.
That's right. He was on Rikers. I mean, that's the thing about, I was rereading an old Comics Journal interview that was around the time this probably came out, and he actually has a quote. He says, like, I wish I was writing about Gotham City, because then he could do anything. But if he's writing about New York, he feels he has to be some sort of realistic. And and he does. He has he's on Rikers Island, I think, and then into Manhattan, and he uses the cabs and the elevated train, although there aren't that many elevated trains in Manhattan. But it is a very New York book, and this is before I ever went to New York, so this is what my vision of New York was this and various cop shows. But
I mean, we've talked on here about how if you're being like, I'm the guardian of Hell's Kitchen is like a very reasonable amount of territory.
Yeah.
To like,
it's not a block or something. Yeah.
Especially for a guy that doesn't fly.
Right. It's not like Hawkeye guards that one building. It's just like,
it's like it's a neighborhood. It's a reasonable amount. It's not the whole island.
It's too bad.
But it's crazy.
Yeah. It's too bad Daredevil could not protect Hell's Kitchen from gentrification, though.
That's right. That is the foe he could not conquer.
That's the one weird thing is that reading comics from the crime comics from the 70s and 80s, they were in a New York that was really like slumlords and very high crime, and it's that might be the thing for like a Gen Zer to read this and be like, I've been to Manhattan. There's no place like this.
Nobody can afford to live there. It's the first time I ever went to Manhattan or New York in general was in '87, and it still had a little bit of this vibe to it. Nowadays, though, no, not such luck.
Cleaned up Times Square.
One of the things about this, reading it again, that really struck me, a couple of things were just one, as a kid reading it, it was like, oh wow, this is a continuation of this story. Like Frank Miller, up until, not that he was the first to ever do it, but like there was a sense of these characters are all interacting with other and affecting each other's lives, and that story just continued to play out with Kingpin and Daredevil and Elektra and Gladiator and all these characters that Matt dealt with. you see them come back later, and this was one of those things where it's like, oh wow, Bullseye's really affected by his last fight with Daredevil. Like, and that was something I felt was really kind of unique in the sense where you didn't really have that. Like, Spider-Man would fight the Vulture, and then
he'd fight him again.
And it wasn't like a continuation of psychological, torture that he's going through. And that I thought was so brilliant of Miller and I think this is, his use of Bullseye really elevated that character to such an iconic villain, because like you said, it's from his point of view, and he uses that so well to really get into the mind of this character and see why he's so driven and so crazed by Daredevil and just is just has to try and kill him, and he just does what he does, kills Elektra and tries to kill Foggy and all these characters, and I just thought it was such a unique kind of thing at that time in comics that nobody had really been doing that, where you're seeing this stuff play out. And then, the other part of it is just the way that this story isn't about Matt. You know what I mean? Like, it's really not about Matt Murdock. This is a Bullseye story. And go ahead, Will.
It's all from his point of view. I mean, he's in it more than Daredevil a lot. And even when what's interesting is, he thinks Daredevil is Matt Murdock, and then he thinks he was wrong. So as he's narrating it at the end, he's saying, well, I might not have gotten you, Daredevil, but your friend Matt Murdock, hopefully this hurt him or something. And of course, then you see Matt. I think that, it's not, it's not the most spectacular writing ever, but especially for back then. And even now, it's just smart writing. Like, have the narration be about the characters you're looking at, but the narrator doesn't know really what's going on, but it reflects on, it makes it more powerful because he doesn't realize he is talking about Daredevil when he's talking about Matt Murdock. And then you see Matt all sad at the grave and all that. And yeah, it's really good.
I love how Bullseye in the narration is like constantly making himself out to be the victim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Of all these things that Daredevil
you did this to me. You made me do this.
This is your fault. This is your fault. That issue. Real quick, where that issue, because they flash back to him when he was on the train tracks and Daredevil saved him. I forget what issue that was. It was not too many before this. That's also a really strong issue, and it's a really Bullseye focused issue. And it's so nice to see it play off, like not just plot wise, but like psychologically, like he hasn't forgotten, and he's really pissed about it.
Like 10
Bullseye's got clarity as opposed to Matt. Like Bullseye is like, he has no doubt about like what he's doing. He's not like, he's crystal clear on like what he wants to do. And in comparison to Daredevil, whose character is so like angsty at times and like sort of like what do I do? Am I doing the right? Like there's clarity. Bullseye is clear. He does not have any doubt. And like that comparison to like not really ever. Daredevil barely. I can't even remember if him in costume ever says a single word.
Yeah, I don't know. He might not.
Yeah, as opposed to like, when he's lawyering it up and talking a lot. But, just like that idea that Bullseye has that clarity of purpose that, Daredevil, even though he's the hero, never seems to have the exact clarity of like, what is it I'm trying to do? Like, am I doing the right thing? He's always
it's the Catholic guilt. I mean, that's the
totally.
And even
Bullseye does not have that.
No.
Yeah, even at the end when Bullseye is, laying there literally paralyzed from the neck down or something, he still is. I mean, and the motif that goes through this whole issue, I don't know how many panels have it, but just his eyes staring out, his eyes staring out, his eyes staring out, and that's the last thing you see. And he's, he's saying, I don't care how long it takes, I'm gonna get you.
This is just another prison that I'll get out of.
Yeah. And even Elektra, who she was the cold, icy killer and all this, she has that moment when she's going to kill Foggy, and he says, wait, you were Matt's girl in college. And there's that panel where she like breaks her, and it's like a really nicely drawn picture of her face where their eyes wide, and she's not the cold killer. And that essentially is where she's she's doomed. She dies after that. She's like let her guard down, and now.
But it's that last moment of kindness that we see from her. That in a weird way, if you look at this, and we can have different opinions. I look at this as kind of like the end of Miller's larger Kingpin story, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It's like, and then the next issue is more of an epilogue, right? And I think that moment where she lets Foggy go is like the redemption of Elektra in a lot of ways.
Well, I think it comes later. I mean, a bit, but
within this story, if this were the end of Miller's like arc, that he's the larger arc that he's written,
right?
Because she dies a few pages later. There's that, and her last word is Matt when she's on his doorstep. She goes to his house, and it's
a great fight scene. I mean, it's
brutal too.
Comics 101. This is a fight scene. So good.
I will argue that this line here, put up pretty good fight, Toots. You're pretty good, but me, I'm magic, is one of the most badass fucking lines from a villain. And then he hits her in the throat with an Ace of Spades card.
And then he says, and now for my next trick. And then you get that panel that's like the legendary, and she killed so many people like that. Like for a long time, Daredevil was just panel after panel of people's shirts being pushed out and not ripping. It goes through their chest and bones, but that fabric is strong.
Obviously not that.
That's right. They're unstable molecule.
There could be some, bone and meat on the end of that.
There is, but they don't want that. Would not get in its comics code.
I think it just looks cool.
It does look cool.
Yeah.
And do you think maybe if they showed the bloody sigh, would that have not gotten past the comics code?
I don't. Reading this issue, I mean, it must have. Either the code just didn't care at this point, or
somebody paid somebody off at the old CCA.
Now it wouldn't get by because
slit with cards. Like it's just it's gruesome.
It's gruesome, and it's a man. Two assassins, but it's a man killing a woman, beating her, and then killing her. It's pretty brutal. Plus, the smoking alone wouldn't get it a code pass.
I wanted to point out something that I noticed. Like you talked about the black blood, but cleverly they use this pink mist every time someone dies. And on the first page with Daredevil getting shot in the head, the whole rest of the page is this pink mist. And that's a very
and the page with that panel right there with Elektra is the pink mist.
The pink mist, and that's I think
Klaus Janson, I think, man,
is so cool.
It's a really clever use of a effect. Because that's sort of that kind of thing of like a gunshot. It's like that pink mist of blood, little tiny droplets of blood. And so that's obviously a very thought through kind of, and I wonder if it's, I'm trying to see where else,
kind of the way you're looking for that, the brilliance of Miller. You listen to comic book artists and writers, and Will, you actually do this about getting your characters to act on page. His characters just act at this point in his career. You feel like you're watching a movie.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, reading this is before I had discovered like Will Eisner, and so it's hard to explain now how different this was from virtually every other comic. I mean, even really good comics like, the X-Men or, Teen Titans, which was a lot of fun. They didn't look like this. They weren't this stripped down, and, they just didn't feel the same way.
Yeah. I love the Bullseye, the end of the Bullseye fight with Daredevil, that after all the talk of training and all of that, it's like this simple act of balance that he uses to beat him. It's
the bouncing on the wire.
Just
point.
How did that wire? That
That's
wire bends in a weird way, though. At one point, I'm not quite sure how that works. It like goes and then it's straight, and I don't know. But in the end,
just like. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, in the end, I mean, because it's all contrasting to the last time they fought. Daredevil saved his life, and he hates that. And this time, Daredevil does not save his life. But Daredevil really didn't have a choice because he's holding him, and Bullseye brings the Psy up. He had to let go. I mean, he couldn't have.
He's also fucking pissed.
Yeah, he is.
I think
all he does is drop him. He doesn't hit him. He just drops him. He falls.
Yeah, I think it's a little ambiguous in the sense of like, well, we don't want Matt to be a cold-blooded killer.
Right.
So there's kind of an excuse there, but
you're not going to kill anyone anymore.
Yeah, I mean, he says it.
Yeah.
You'll
kill no one
ever
again. And then and no sound effects on that page. He just hits, and he hits like right on his neck.
Yeah.
It's good.
So, I mean, that's a very Daredevil thing to do. To be like, I'm just gonna let him break his back.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna kill him. I'm just gonna, and I'm sure I'll feel okay about this later. I'm sure this will be.
He goes to the hospital then, and like 1 or 2 issues later, and like holds a gun on him while he does a monologue for the whole issue or something.
Yeah, that's the issue. Yeah, the famous. I love that cover of Daredevil. No more Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah, that's it.
And he's got the 45 or whatever.
Like Terry Austin inked it, I think.
It might be. Yeah.
The Dirty Harry cover.
Yeah, the Dirty Harry.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of like movies, so and we talked about this on Film Force 5, but was it 1980 that Taxi Driver came out?
No, that was like 76. That was a few years earlier.
Okay. Oh, I'm thinking of Raging Bull.
Yeah, Raging Bull.
Okay.
But still, that was definitely in the air.
In the air.
There were so many new, like the Death Wish sequels and all that were out around then.
But just the idea of like seeing it from Bullseye's perspective, it reminds me of like Taxi Driver in that sense. Like
in that monologue.
The monologue, the driven, sort of psychosis of Bullseye and why, kind of the peek into the mind of a maniac kind of thing, which is similar.
Well, it's in the narration, and we talked about him, building up his victimhood. It's almost like he's pleading with you to think of him as the hero.
Right. Like, Yeah, exactly. This is my story. I'm the hero here. I'm the one you should be identifying with. And
who do you think he's talking to?
I don't know.
I mean, if you think of it like in a meta way, like who is Bullseye thinking that he's talking?
I've literally
he's talking to Daredevil, right? Like I guess he's talking to.
Yeah, he does talk actually because he says you've got to suffer first. Yeah, he is talking to Daredevil. Really?
Okay.
Yeah. He is.
I mean, it's interesting because I actually kind of take it a little like the thing that interests me about this reading it now is how to me unmarvelly Bullseye is as a villain. As like he is like he's it's not like a Dr. Doom or like a later stage Magneto where you're sort of like, oh, I can see like glimmers of something that is recognizable as like it's like Bullseye is a homicidal like maniac. Like he's coming to kill.
He's not sympathetic.
He's not sympathetic. He has no like. There is no redemption. There is no larger like goal that somehow you could see him as perhaps being the hero. Like he wants to kill Daredevil and he wants to hurt the people around him, and he's very clear about doing that the entire time.
And he kills a lot of people in this issue who aren't Elektra.
Yeah,
he kills a bunch of cops and sort of
criminal
criminal bystanders.
He's a psychopath. It doesn't matter. They're just kind of in his way.
They don't. They're not. Yeah. They aren't a factor to him. Yeah,
he is a.
But it's interesting just in the context to me of like, like this is very like not sort of Marvel-y as far as like what you would say is like a Marvel villain is like this guy. Not even like the Kingpin. Who the Kingpin you could kind of see as like not he's got a humanity.
Yeah, he's got his wife and exactly.
Yeah, there's elements of him that you can recognize, whereas like Miller's made Bullseye sort of like unflinchingly like intense, and like he's crystal clear, and like nothing will short of death and probably not even death will stop him.
Yeah,
from what he's going to do.
It's great. I mean, it's a great, and he used Bullseye like throughout. You know, he was in that one issue, and I think maybe once or twice before in Miller's run. I mean, and I don't. Before that, Bullseye was just a guy. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's also
you go back and read some of the earlier Daredevil issues with Bullseye, and he is almost arcade like in his cartoonishness. He's really feels like a circus villain. I think even one of the issues is at a circus. Miller did what Miller does. He took that kernel of that idea of that character and was like, no, this is a cold-blooded killer. He's a psychopath, and we're going to portray him like that. He's an assassin.
Remember when Oscar nominee Colin Farrell played him in the movie, and he had he was bald and he had the Bullseye brand on his forehead or whatever. Good Lord.
We've come a long way.
Yeah. You know, the way that Miller lets like the story sort of unfold with the aspect that Bullseye is, like I said earlier, he's not a genius. He's not like some like sort of like super genius who's got some trick, but he's not even particularly like clever. No. Like he's like
you're right.
He's obsessed.
Yeah.
And he's he knows what he wants to do, and he just keeps moving forward. You know, he hears that, you know, Foggy Nelson is a target of Elektra, so he slaps that bug on his back, follows him. I mean, it's pretty simple what he does, and you know,
he Daredevil first appeared in. I mean, Bullseye first appeared in Daredevil 131 in March 1976, created by Marv Wolfman and John Romita Sr.
Okay.
And he first battles and defeats Daredevil at a circus to establish his reputation as an extortionist.
Yeah. He wasn't even an assassin.
No.
And wasn't his shtick like he could use anything as a weapon?
Yeah.
Like, you know, he uses the pill. There's a scene in some issue where he kills
playing cards.
Is he kill like a fly with a paper clip or something?
Yeah,
probably. He like hits him in that.
Well, that was the Colin Farrell bit, is that he kills a bunch of people, but you know he undoes the paper clip and uses it to kill somebody. So they picked that bit up. But yeah, I think that they actually use that in this episode pretty well. That anything can be a weapon to him, you know. And then there's the whole thing of him using, you know, Elektra's own weapons to kill her
against her,
to fight Matt. So.
And at this point, those weapons were like iconic because she used them all the time. You know, those size. I mean, because it was like you're right. It was ninjas were big. Yeah, you know, we used to go to flea markets and buy throwing stars and stuff like that. And it was the era.
Real throwing.
Yeah, real throwing stars.
They sold them to children.
Yeah.
And
there's a part where he's in a waterfront bar and like these like fat killers like immediately bust out the nunchucks, and it's like
it was just in the air back in the 80s.
I owned multiple katana, nunchucks, throwing stars, sai. I had a pair of sai. I had it all.
Frank Miller buy real Chinese throwing stars when I was like 14.
Yeah, we would throw them and hit trees, you know, and stuff. Oh yeah.
Me and my friends one Halloween all walked around with real fucking katanas in full head to toe ninja costumes, slicing up pumpkins all over town. Got stopped by the police. And they just were like, okay, have a good Halloween.
Have fun, kids. That would not happen now, my friend.
12 years old, running around with
sword.
Yeah, with sharpened fucking swords in all black ninja costumes. Like terrorizing the neighborhood.
It was a magical time.
It really was. You could do
Frank Miller to thank.
Yeah.
For just the whole ninja culture, you know, really.
Well, I mean, obviously, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was so influenced by this run of Daredevil.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
And created that a frenzy of ninja movies and everything else.
TMNT is a love letter to Miller's.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Miller's, I mean, everyone always cites Ronin, but it's really Daredevil.
You know?
their origin story is the same.
It is as Daredevil's, right?
As Murdoch's.
The radioactive stuff, and
hits him, and then
the hand and the foot. I mean,
exactly.
It's like, it's not far.
She was trained as a ninja. Oh shit!
Yeah, shit.
Well, we talked about earlier in the episode. He's like, and I know what you're doing. You're off practicing your karate.
Listen,
yeah.
This was at a magical time where people still thought like karate and ninjutsu were like real effective,
man.
You know.
Well, those are the only two. Those were the only
Daredevil's off at his fancy gym practicing his
karate.
You had kung fu as well. Kung fu was
you did, there. And you had was this the era of like the ninja, the what is it, Ninja the Domination and all those movies were?
Was that the Canon films?
Franco Nero is a ninja,
Italian
ninja. Actor,
American Ninja.
Uh-huh.
You had all the Shokasugi, Kasagi, I can't remember. All those movies.
Yeah. We've talked about that book, but that I don't know if you got it, Sal, but I was talking about this. There's this incredible coffee table book called Our Fists Break Bricks that's all about like martial arts pop culture from the 60s to essentially like the late 80s, but it has all the ninja stuff and when nunchucks were popular, and it even has like a whole thing on Count Dante and his
someone needs to do an independent comic about Count Dante, like Ed Pisker needs to do a Count Dante.
I can't believe he's not, to be honest. I mean,
right? It seems like right up his alley. It seems
we know who can write it.
I remember there's this kid in my grade school who loved ninja. He was like the one who bought Ninja Stars, and like he had like the catalogs with all like the ninja stuff in it. And we had to do this thing where we had to do reports on like every country, right? And he picked Japan,
of course.
And his report was solely about like ninjas and samurai, and that was
I want to read that report.
I want to be friends with him.
I want to read that.
So okay, have you any of you seen the movie? It's a Chuck Norris movie called The Octagon.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I don't know how long ago it was. 1980 is when it came out, and I think it was a canon movie. It's a terrible movie, but I challenge you because I watched it one night and I might have been a little either high or intoxicated on something. And I started to get in my head the thought that the movie is really about a psychopath, Chuck Norris, who's like paranoid delusional and thinks he's being attacked by ninjas all the time, but is really just murdering people all around town. And if you watch that movie with that in mind, it's a totally different film and it's way better.
And a better movie.
Yeah, it's a better movie. It's so
I want to point out, as long as we're on the topic of karate, is that in this original issue, we had on one page, we had an ad for "I'll make you a master of karate" for $1.99, and then we have the life-size.
Hold it up.
Karate dummy. Let's see.
Oh yeah.
Also, I believe $1.99. And these, you guys know these ads used to be ubiquitous in comic books.
Oh,
you're reading this comic, and you're like $1.99
for to be a ninja. Dummy? To be a ninja,
and I can stab it with my own sai. You know. It's like, hell yeah. So you guys ever order anything out of a comic?
Oh yeah.
No. I don't know if I did.
I ordered what are the seahorses?
Oh, sea monkeys. Yeah.
Sea monkeys. I ordered sea monkeys. I ordered X-ray specs and never got them. I don't think. I ordered a bunch of stuff out of comics for sure.
So Will, that has a comics price guide. Is that, I don't know if it's Mile High or whoever it was.
Yeah, it's let's see. It's Moondance.
Okay, what's X-Men #1 going for? The mail order X-Men #1.
Well, let's see. We have giant size X-Men #1.
Okay.
$70 even back then.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Oh damn.
I know. And let's see. It doesn't have X-Men #1.
Okay.
Well, that's also like right when Phoenix happened. Maybe that's also like the peak.
Phoenix, like Death of Phoenix is $750.
All this ninja talk, and I just realized I kind of am sporting a Lee Van Cleef look from from John Carpenter's Escape from New York. I got a little
there
bit
you
of
go.
a little Lee Van Cleef.
In
As I get older, I think I'm just going to
Yeah.
cosplay as Lee Van.
You're gonna
Cleef.
lean.
You
You're just
should.
gonna lean into the Lee.
Yeah,
Do it, man.
absolutely.
Lean into Lee.
He had a long and satisfying career.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, we know, this is a book that you picked, and we've talked extensively about the issue itself. But I wonder, like, can you point to anything in your work as a comic book writer that this directly influenced or indirectly influenced, or anything where maybe you pulled something out of this issue or anything like that?
I think I don't know if I can think of anything specifically as a professional comic book writer, although sort of the idea of interesting panel layouts and stripping back the dialogue and that sort of thing. And I think especially when I was first starting out, when I was writing fight scenes, I would take books like this down and see well, how did he do this? How do you stage a fight scene? Because I had a friend doing comics when I was in college, and sometimes he would get scripts and it would be like pages 14 to 17, and it would just say they fight, go nuts. And he
Marvel method.
And he would be like, I hate that. You gotta give him a little something. So I would always try to work my fight scenes. But as I was leafing through this, what came to mind almost immediately is I drew a lot of comics as a kid, and I did small press comics in like college and afterwards, like mini comics, before I started writing professionally. But even from like, I don't know, junior high and through part of high school, I drew this series. I can't remember if I've told you guys before, but called Frog, where I was like it was just this character. Like when I first started drawing him, he was bionic, and he was kind of like a superhero, but he was also like a detective, but he also was like a space guy, just whatever story I wanted to tell. And I drew like 62 issues of this thing.
Wow.
I did just little mini comic sides, but they were about, like 8 pages long. And, when I first started drawing them, they were really crude. And when I was done, they were still crude, but they were a lot better and also way more like whatever I was reading. Like you can tell when I discovered Byrne X-Men. You could tell when I discovered Merrill Lewis Daredevil. In fact, I drew one issue where he went to New York for a comic book show, and I drew Frank Miller in it, like as a character in it, because I found a picture of Frank Miller. I'm like, I'm gonna draw Frank Miller in this. But there are so many fight scenes that I just ripped off of this, and I would start to draw because originally I just draw 6 panels, standard grid. And here's where I started, like, I'll do thin panels, I'll do tall panels, I'll do all that. And it just really opened me up to the possibilities of a different way to tell a story. And a lot of this, Miller, I'm be the first to admit, especially in this era, was, very influenced by Eisner. But like I said, I hadn't seen Eisner at this point. And he took Eisner in some different, Eisner never was that big an action guy, like you would think, I mean, there were fight scenes in the Spirit, but it wasn't like this.
Did he work at the Eisner Studios? Did he come out of that?
I think he did.
Did he?
Yeah. The Eisner Eiger Studios, isn't that?
I don't know.
I want to say that he did briefly, but I don't
long.
know.
I think he was like, did Simonson
really
maybe sort of shepherd him a little bit in his early days? And
Byrne.
Because the other thing was, I'm sorry, what?
I was going to say, the thing that's really great about the fight scenes in this comic and Daredevil in general, as he's doing it, is like the punches have impact, right? And it's like he does the thing where like that I don't think a lot of storytellers always do within comics, where it's like, actually this fight scene is going to be a series of moments of these two characters actually physically making contact with each other.
Right.
And so like this panel is Bullseye hitting her, this panel is Elektra hitting him, instead of like sort of like, here's a montage of a bunch of scenes of a fight that are moments from the fight. He sort of like tells the fight, right?
You can see like there's one page here. This is during their big fight when they're like essentially rolling on the ground, and she like goes to wrap her headscarf around his neck, and then he just like slams her head into the ground. And it's you're right. It's a fight. It feels like this is not a superhero fight you would want to be in. It's not like, big punches and people flying across the room.
Yeah.
It hurts. It looks like it hurts.
There's a lot of times in comics, I feel like sometimes you see like a superhero fight or a fight Well, you're not seeing the fight. You're seeing like a moment from the fight before we get to the next part where someone talks.
Right.
Like part of it, I think, is like, I don't know if it's Frank being both the writer and the artist, is like, well, like actually this fight, we're gonna see the fight from beginning to end. Like you're not gonna see glimpses of the fight. Like you're gonna see the whole. Yeah, lean into the lead.
There it is.
Sorry, I had to.
No, Lee Van Cleef would agree. But you got to see, like, I feel like when you see these fights, you see it from beginning to end, and you actually know what happens, and there's a story told within it, as opposed to like, okay, here's, like you were saying, like pages 14 through 17 is a fight, like go crazy and show things,
I mean,
and then at the end, we'll have them talk to each other,
exactly.
like that sort of.
And you're right. It's like those fights are they're just because the comic has to have a fight scene. So here's the fight scene. But the fight scenes are the story. I mean, it's like, like a good movie, like the dance number it won't just be a dance. It'll like tell part of the story and it'll reveal character. And that's what happens here. And, I'm looking through this and I don't think when they're fighting, when Elektra is fighting Bullseye and when Daredevil's fighting Bullseye, there's no dialogue. I mean, they're not like, not just making quips, but they're not, there's none of that. It's like,
Oh, it's like, it's
Bullseye says, and then he says the one line Sal says, but the fight's essentially over at that point.
Yeah. It was, I mean, these are incredibly highly trained killers who are in a fight to the death.
Yeah, they're fighting to kill. That's the thing. I mean,
to have banter, to have like Spider-Man style banter in the middle of a fight where the other person can easily kill you wouldn't.
And I love,
sense, right?
Like the Ditko Spider-Mans are some of my favorite comics ever, and I love those fight scenes. But that's not this, and this shouldn't be. And a lot of early Daredevil, like in the Gene Colan stuff, he was bantering it up. He was essentially Spider-Man in a lot of ways, bouncing around and swinging and stuff,
I mean, go
ahead, Sal.
I was just going to say, in the fight with Daredevil at the end of the issue, there's they don't, as soon as that fight starts, you hear you see the inner monologue of Bullseye, but they don't say anything until
the big, you won't say
until he drops him. Yeah. That's there's 4 pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of fight and not a single line of dialogue.
And Miller does that nice thing too when they go onto the train tracks and you just get that click 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 click. It's that's very atmospheric and
it adds a tension.
It does.
You know what I mean? Like you can hear it, and it's like it adds tension to that scene of like, oh shit, like the train's coming and it's a great fight.
I think you guys are right. I don't think until Daredevil says you'll kill no one ever again, I don't think Daredevil says anything in this issue. I don't think he says a single word as Daredevil, and he barely says anything as Matt Murdock. He makes that big court speech, and maybe he says something in the morgue, but other than that, it's just much.
the little conversation that tips him off to that it's Bullseye.
Right. Yeah. He hears him. Yeah.
Small talk, basically. I did a quick spot check. His first published work was at Gold Key Comics on the recommendation of Neil Adams, who had
that makes
shown his work to and got kind of.
I also think it's funny that back in the 80s, if you wanted to sneak in and pretend to work at the morgue, you could just kill somebody and show up and say that they quit and I got hired.
Well, there is that funny line where he's like, he quit. He's like, he won't be back.
He won't be back.
He won't be back. Yeah.
That's just good. I mean, again, it's like, Sin City. I mean, I like some of it, not. It's kind of, I think he gave into some of Miller's worst writing impulses, but that's just good, terse, sharp, funny writing. I mean, it's just those there. There's one thing about this, because this is 82, like early, 81. Very early 82, like 80, late 81, early 2.
I think no.
And
December of 81.
This was an interesting time in comics because, I personally think, and I think you guys would probably agree to, at least to an extent, that when Alan Moore came in, it really changed sort of how comics were written, an idea of how you could write a comic and how you could, he really was a seismic change, even in comics that weren't even comics that didn't reflect how he wrote, they kind of were a reaction against it. Like, we're going to go more, we don't need the, highfalutin writing or this and that. But right before that, there were a lot of interesting comics. You could feel comics almost looking for something like, we want to take the next step. Like, you had the X-Men to a certain extent, but you had, some of the early independents. You had first, you had American Flag, and you had books like that right before, or maybe right, it was when Moore was on Swamp Thing and when Marvel Man was being published. And it just feels like comics were all set to become something new, and it did. I mean, Watchmen and a lot of it was due to Miller. I mean, he had, in the space of about a year, you had Dark Knight, you had Year One, and you had Born Again, which are, 3 all-timers, and you had Electra Assassin. I mean, that's a hell of a run. And, and he said, and it all was because of Daredevil, because nobody cared about Daredevil. So he could do weird stuff on it, and they didn't care.
Yeah. Have you ever read the Alan Moore essay about why he likes Frank Miller? I forget. It was in some Marvel UK thing. I got to dig it up somewhere. It's like in one of those weird Marvel UK books where it's like, here's a Captain Britain story plus a Daredevil story,
Yeah.
It was called Daredevils, and there's a whole section in one of the issues where Alan Moore talks about how much he loves Frank Miller in there. I'll dig it up and send it to you guys, a picture of it, because it's really interesting.
In one of those comics, there was also, and I can't remember who drew it, but Alan Moore did a spoof of Frank Miller's Daredevil. I should see if I could dig that up somewhere, because it's interesting, and it's this era Daredevil, and it's like pre-American Alan Moore, so it's all about like how gritty it is, and how, I think it's called Grit, in fact, like the title of the story. But it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Well, going back to your point though a little bit, I was going to say, the issue before this, Daredevil 180, is like this weird issue where Daredevil goes into the sewers and fights
with the alligators and
bizarre zombie king guy that's holding the Kingpin's wife.
Right.
And it's like, what a weird contrast between that issue and this issue.
Yeah. No, you're right. That's true.
It's almost like a filler or a throwback of an issue comparatively.
Part of it is, I did read that issue too, because I was like, what happens before this issue? I was just trying to set my brain. And one of the things I do, it's interesting, is because I feel it in 181 especially, is like Frank Miller's kind of like pushing against a lot of there's tension with superhero things, like your secret identity is stupid. Of course you'll be found out. Right. Of course, like someone will figure you're a lawyer, you're up talking, right? Like, and the way he presents that's just like part of the story is, of course someone's going to figure out what you're doing, like, duh, like that's what's going to happen, and like, of course this guy is going to break out of jail. He can use anything as a weapon, like he's still within the realm of comics, but is like pushing like sort of like this, like Daredevil shouldn't have a secret. Of course someone will figure out Daredevil's secret identity. Of course Bullseye will break out. Like these conventions of how we think comics or like what a superhero story is, like without being like, this is stupid, because I don't think that's what it is. He is sort of like pushing against those things in the context of like, Daredevil's the type of character who this would happen to. Yeah. Like, and like really playing with those elements a lot, which I think makes it resonate for years later. Oh yeah. You can recognize those things in it.
And I think, when they did Born Again, where, the whole impetus is Kingpin learns Daredevil's secret identity. And then it wasn't, Miller was smart enough to not just, Kingpin didn't go on TV and say, he's Daredevil. Or he didn't even try and kill Matt Murdock. He just slowly took apart his life. I love those issues, because I love a story where the hero is knocked down and down and down and down until finally he climbs back up. And it's just, there's so many comics that are just kind of, dark for the purpose of being dark and this and that. And I love a story that has like a, when the hero gets to be heroic and, and do something exciting, you can root for him. That's one of my favorite Miller comics, just because it's such an old fashioned comic in a way, but with modern plotting and modern twists. And, you know, he did a lot of Alan Moore kind of stuff in that, where how he treated the Avengers and Captain America as these frightening, otherworldly, powerful beings that Daredevil had virtually no relation. You know, they were something else. Like the first time Alan Moore wrote the Justice League in Swamp Thing, and it was like, they're scary. You know, you don't know them, and they are not like you. And, you know, now all comics are essentially written like that. But back then, it was exciting.
So Miller took over originally Daredevil 158 as the artist. He was a cover artist, and he was doing some issues of Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. And then he started working with Roger McKenzie and Klaus Janson on Daredevil, and the art was great, but the stories were still kind of crappy. And
they were just your average.
And they were talking about canceling it. And then Denny O'Neil took over as editor.
He was editor on this issue, I think.
Yeah, and
the great Denny O'Neil.
He found another job for McKenzie so that Miller could draw it and write it. Yeah. And that's when it became.
And I think Miller's first issue as writer was Elektra's first issue.
168. Yeah. Yep. First full appearance of Elektra.
You know, her name is spelled wrong on that cover, by the way. Have you ever noticed that?
Yes.
They put a C in it.
Yeah.
On the cover, first appearance, and there's a big C.
Oh, comics.
No, we didn't know.
It's gotta go out, baby. You gotta let that.
Yeah, nobody know. You know, back then it's like, who's gonna care? These kids don't care. What the hell? Nobody, they don't collect them. Nobody's gonna read this in 6 months. It won't be reprinted. There aren't trade paperbacks of these things.
Yeah, there's not gonna be 4 grown men talking about this.
Yeah, 40-some years from now. Yeah, you think those little kids buying it off the stands are going to care about it decades later?
Yeah, right.
They'll have lives and families to deal with.
Yeah. They're not going to have like giant hardcover editions of it. And,
how are they going to connect? There's not going to be a global web of some kind they can talk to.
Yeah, nice. All right, guys. Well, this was our first Under the Influence.
This was great. I'm so glad you gave me a reason to reread this.
Right? We knew that you were going to be our first guest.
I know. I didn't realize I was picking such an obvious book, but I'm glad I picked this one because.
So you guys you weren't in the text, but this was Will's second choice.
Yes, and I almost thought we were doing a different show tonight.
so Will of course picked American Flag #1.
My man.
But we are doing the American Flag, the first 6 issues as our trade talks, as picked by Sal. So to entice him to give us another comic to talk about, I told Will that he can sit in with us whenever we do the
American
flag.
Yeah.
The flag
I'd love to.
Yeah, for sure.
So that'll be in probably a week or two, and we're already reaching out to other past guests on the show and just friends of ours to come in and do Under the Influence. So let us know how you liked it. You can just hit us up on all the socials or the emails and that kind of stuff. But it's something that I think we're looking forward to. It narrows the focus of what we're talking about and gives us a chance. I mean, we've never had a deep dive on Daredevil 181 before, so it's a lot of fun.
I was thinking today, if I had to do one, but not a book I've probably talked about in the past, and I was trying to dig up, I was like, what comic book do I really distinctly like? I was trying to think of I remember reading it. And one of the most memorable, I remember when I used to go to Fleet Farm. With my dad. Not Farm and Fleet.
Fleet Farm, right?
Different places.
Yep.
Different color scheme.
My dad, who'd be looking at such things as I'm going to buy a length of chain, or I'm going to, the type of things you do at Fleet Farm.
I have a shrub I need to pull out of the backyard with a truck.
I need some all-weather socks.
It was going to be a lot of
17 gallons of kerosene.
Yeah, exactly.
And peanut oil.
It was going to be a trip. So I could pick up something to read at the start, and I would sit in the cart and read it. And sometimes I would pick Mad Magazine. But one time, there was a month or two where Marvel was putting out these like digest-sized Spider-Man comics that I got really into when I was like, I must have been like 7. It was like right when I first read comics for the first time. And like, I remember reading, and like, I was young enough that I was so totally, I didn't know anything. I knew who Spider-Man was because it was a cartoon, but like, I didn't know these were old. Like, it was just like, it's Spider-Man, you know, so you're reading them. So I read, like, I remember reading the one where Gwen Stacy's dad dies and being like, oh my God, I can't believe that he knew that Peter Parker was Spider. And I remember being in the cart at Fleet Farm reading this like very poorly printed, like digest sized one and being like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. As my dad's, you know, looking at like, you know, wood paneling, like the right size of it.
Excellent. Well, the first maybe the first comic I ever remember reading is my mom bought it for me when I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6, whatever year it was, like for a trip to grandma's house. And it was the Spider-Man, I want to say 122. It's where Green Goblin dies after Gwen. It's like the issue after Gwen Stacy dies and Green Goblin dies. And it is so depressing for a child. It's like Green Goblin dies, Gwen Stacy dies. Everybody hates Spider-Man. I mean, they hate him. Harry Osborn is on PCP, like, and he won't talk to Peter. It's like so sad.
It's negative.
Yeah.
It is. And as a little kid, I'm like, this isn't what the cartoon is like.
What is this?
Yeah, who wrote those?
Where's Iceman?
I think it was Jerry Conway wrote that.
Yeah, Jerry Conway did the Death of the Stacys and all that. You know, you hear why he killed Gwen Stacy.
What?
He hated the character because it was based on Stan Lee's wife.
Really?
That's a rumor.
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess Jerry's the only one left of that group to tell that story. So.
Yeah. I saw him at a Comic-Con here in Milwaukee a couple years back. So, Will,
how could he hate Joan Lee?
Joan Lee.
Yeah.
The other thing is that because it's not the most influential comic to you, we'll let people know that this doesn't mean that we can't have people back as return guests to talk about other comics that have influenced them. So this
obviously I would love to be back. Yes, but you know, I understand it. Not immediately.
Yeah.
Why was I not invited back immediately?
That's right. Why are we recording another episode right now?
So I think that, you know, are we good? We still want to keep these around an hour or so? Is that all set? Will, we obviously have to ask you what you're up to. You know, thank you for coming and being our first guest on this, but what do you have going on?
I'm still writing The 9 for Interpop Comics. It's an online comic. It's a big, crazy superhero action, and you can read it for free if you go to Interpop, all one word, comics.com. And there's like a section like read for free, and you can read some past issues, and it's like, it's fun though. It's superheroes you've never heard of, but it's big, crazy, cosmic. It's very unlike this issue of Daredevil.
It's not gritty and
it's not gritty.
Women getting stabbed through their spines.
There's none of that. No.
Forget it then.
Why don't?
Then of course you're one of the constants on Film Force 5.
That's right, Film Force
part of the larger AC family. And and we can't forget that. Are you still doing the part-time DJ gig with?
I am. I'm doing a weekly radio show. It's an hour long. It airs on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Central Time, and then it replays on the weekends. If you go to my Facebook page or Twitter, you can find out when it's airing, and that's on suburbsradio.com. It's so much fun. It's just digging in my record collection. And the upcoming episode for next week will be all movie songs, but different movie songs. At least 2 from Russ Meyer movies. So
nice.
Nice.
Just watching what was I watching? Super Vixens? Not too long ago.
That's so good.
It's such an interesting movie.
Yeah, that's the thing about his movies are so crazy, but they're perfectly edited and perfectly shot. I mean, the guy knew what he was doing. He was just telling insane stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. Yeah, well, thanks, Will. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
An
This was so much fun.
awesome issue, of course. And yeah, I don't have anything else. I think we covered it pretty damn well.
I'm glad we didn't come in with 8-ball number 4.
It's tempting.
I am very interested at some point. Like, I want to get to the point where it's like somebody picks something that I've never read,
right?
And you know what I mean, like in something that maybe something that I didn't like. Or,
yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Get somebody.
It'll happen.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Will. We'll see you. We got more Film Force 5
coming up. Yeah,
coming up, and then you'll be back to help us navigate the trade talk on American Flag, the first 6 issues. And yeah, we're gonna work on more guests for this. We'll hopefully get to the point that we give you like a week's heads up so you can read the comic at home before we talk about it. I think would be fun, so we're working towards that. In the meantime,
in between time,
we'll be everywhere in
hand around comics. Oh, we didn't do drink roll call. What the hell? Oh, next time.
Yeah, I'm drinking tea. I'm old and
drinking canned water.
I had a sidecar.
Oh, very nice. I had a tequila squirt or a hillbilly margarita. As
there you go.
I love a bourbon and squirt.
I do love a bourbon and squirt. Chris introduced me to the beauty of the bourbon and squirt.
Yep. Tequila and squirt is an excellent, interesting mix.
I've got some mezcal and some squirt. I may do that.
I'm telling you, the tequila and squirt is an interesting combination. It's a different thing. It's very tasty.
Margarita.
If we want to talk cocktails, boys.
We can do that anytime.
We can do that. We can turn this off and just talk cocktails afterwards.
Yeah. Well, let's do. Yeah. We'll have a true drink roll call
next time. All right. Bye-bye.